You know, when you first see a setup like this, you might think it's just a simple greenhouse. But what we're really about to look at is a high-tech laboratory, a place where scientists are essentially learning to speak the secret language of plants, one single data point at a time.
Yeah, this is definitely not your average backyard garden. I mean, look closely here. What you're seeing is this whole array of super sophisticated sensors. They're measuring literally everything: temperature, humidity, even solar radiation. And it's all wired up to capture this constant flood of information. This kind of controls environment is what lets scientists run really precise experiments, turning something as simple as growing grass into a deep scientific investigation.
And really, it all boils down to this one huge question. What are the actual secrets to creating the absolute perfect environment for a plant to thrive? It sounds so simple, right? But the answer? Well, it's kind of hidden inside an absolute avalanche of data. So, to find that answer, scientists have this toolkit packed with different metrics they use to gather clues about the world. But from the plant's point of view, it's like they're detectives, following a trail to solve a case. Okay, so one of the most important clues in their toolkit is something called growing degree days, or GDD. Now, the easiest way to wrap your head around this is to think of it like a heat budget. Plants, they need a certain amount of accumulated heat to grow and develop, and GDD is basically just tracking that budget, day in and day out. So when we look at the GDD over a 62-day period here in the fall, you can see this super clear downward trend. What that's telling the scientists is that the total heat budget is shrinking as winter gets closer, and that is a major signal for plant growth. All right, another key clue is NDVI. Think of this as basically a plant health score. By measuring how light reflects off the plant canopy, these sensors can spit out a single number that tells us how green, how dense, and how healthy the vegetation is. It's almost like taking the plant's pulse. And just like that heat budget, this plant health score, well, it also trended downwards over the same period, which, makes total sense. Less heat, less light, the plant's condition is going to change. But then, when the scientists looked a little closer at the data, specifically at temperature, a really strange puzzle started to emerge. And this brings us to what I'm calling the curious case of the temperature. You'd think measuring temperature would be pretty straightforward, right? But in this micro garden, it uncovered this puzzling observation that honestly just didn't seem to make any sense at first. Okay, let's look at these two charts side by side. On the left, you've got the surface temperature of the grass canopy, and on the right, the temperature down at the bottom. Now, each bar represents grass clipped to a different height. Pay attention to that third bar in each chart, the one for the 5-centimeter grass. See how it just stands out? Now, here's the really fascinating part. The grass that was clipped to 5 centimeters was consistently the warmest. Not the shortest grass, not the tallest, but the one right there in the middle. It was warmest at the surface and at the bottom, which just defied any simple explanation. And this, of course, led the researchers to the central question of their whole investigation: why? Why on earth is the grass clipped to 5 centimeters so much warmer? What is so special about this one specific height? The answer, as it turns out, wasn't about the plant itself, but about the hidden world right around it. So to solve this puzzle, we have to zoom in. I mean, way in. We have to explore the microclimate. This is this incredibly complex, constantly changing environment that exists in just a few feet, from the soil all the way to the top of the plant. Take a look at this chart. It's showing the air temperature measured at 6 different heights on just one day. Look at that dramatic separation between the lines during the heat of the day. The air way up at the top is way warmer than the air down near the bottom. This is called temperature layering or stratification. And hey, it's not just temperature. The exact same thing happens with humidity. The air down near the bottom of the plants is a lot more humid than the air at the top. So this whole micro world isn't uniform at all. It's this complex stack of totally different environmental layers. Get this. The researchers measured a staggering difference of up to 8 degrees Celsius. That's about 14 degrees Fahrenheit across just 1.8 meters of vertical space. I mean, that is an enormous temperature gradient in such a tiny area. And somewhere in that difference lies the clue to our mystery. Okay, so all the clues are on the table. We've got our temperature puzzle, and we know there's a super complex microclimate. So now it's time for the reveal. The answer wasn't about the raw temperature itself, but something much, much more subtle. The key insight really comes from this one line in the research. The delta, which is just a fancy word for the difference, between the canopy surface and the air temperature is an incredibly powerful indicator. Specifically, it can tell us all about a process called transpiration. So what is transpiration? Well, to put it simply, it's how plants sweat. That's it. They pull water up from their roots and then they release it as vapor from their leaves. And this whole process has a cooling effect, just like when sweating cools us down. So the bigger the temperature difference, the more cooling is probably going on. And here it is. This is the aha moment. When the scientists decided to chart the difference in temperature between the top and the bottom of the canopy, all that messy data just snapped into this perfect logical order. The tallest grass, it showed the largest temperature difference, meaning it was doing the most cooling. The shortest grass showed the least. Suddenly, the data was perfectly ordered by height. The mystery was solved. So in the end, the puzzle was never really about one part of the plant just being warmer. It was all about how the plant's physical structure, its height, completely changed its interaction with that microclimate, which then affected its ability to cool itself down through transpiration. It turns out, the taller the grass, the greater its cooling power. So we solved a pretty neat puzzle about the temperature of grass. But why does this tiny world actually matter in the grand scheme of things? Well, it's because the principles discovered here have massive implications that scale up from this one greenhouse to, well, the entire globe. This level of insane detail is what makes true precision agriculture possible. By tracking the big picture conditions like GDD, scientists can then fine-tune the immediate environment, map out all those tiny microclimate variations, and then finally isolate exactly how specific treatments, like something as simple as clipping height, actually impact the plant. So here's the key takeaway. Understanding this microclimate leads to much more efficient agriculture. By measuring what's happening right where it matters, at the plant's level, we can save precious resources like water. We can improve all our models, and we can get a much, much clearer picture of plant health. And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. This research really shows that every single plant exists within its own unique microclimate, its own tiny world. So the real challenge, and maybe the great opportunity ahead of us, is figuring out how we can learn to truly listen and maybe even speak its language.